Hi, Melanie. So I'll start. Thank you very much for your synopsis of the book. I'll start with one question. As an Asian studies scholar, when you see many of the primary defenders of the West, people like Ayaan Hirsi Ali, a new example, they say that without Judeo-Christian cultures, values, the West has no future. And you take it a step farther, and you say that at the root of Judeo-Christian values are Jewish values, and that's what we should embrace. And I want to take it a step further, and I'll say that the Abrahamic legacy is universal, a different kind of universalism from Western universalism, and Jews take part in Western culture. We are not only Western, we are not exclusively Western, and therefore you should align yourself with Muslim reformers, because there is actually a Judeo-Islamic tradition as well, whatever it was in the past and could be in the future, but you should align yourself with Muslim reformers and Hindus, who many times find themselves on the right side of these issues. And many of the barbarians we know are actually Westerners. So the question is, what exactly you're defending? Maybe you're defending Abrahamic values or civilization itself, and who your allies are.
Right, thank you for that. Yes, I'm not defending Judeo-Christian values. I'm defending Jewish values. And I'm accepting that Christianity has a very important part to play in rescuing the West, because Christianity is the foundational creed of the West. But Christianity didn't come from nowhere. It's basically a sect that got out of hand. And the values are Jewish values. And your point about them being universal is both right and wrong, in my view. I think I understand exactly where you're coming from. There are many, many people who are not Jews, are Christians, who are not religious at all, and who come from different creeds. They may be Muslim, they may be Hindu, they may be Sikh, they may be Zoroastrian, but they subscribe to the same set of principles. And that's fine. And in my book, I have suggested that what I would like to see is what I call a countercultural resistance movement, made up of a kind of coalition of the willing, if you like, made up of people from all cultures and creeds, black and white, straight and gay, women and men, different sorts of religion, Muslim reformers, Hindu reformers, people of religion, people of no religion, all of whom understand and value and want to survive the values, the core values of the West. But in order that they should do so, they have to understand these are not universal values. They are particular values. And if you strip away the foundational biblical identity of those, or source of those values, then you get to precisely where we've got to, which is that people say, well, you know, it's all basically human rights. That's really all we care about. Well, no, actually, that's inimical to what I'm talking about. So, yes, you're right. Certainly, I would want, absolutely, this is not an exclusive thing at all. But in order to promote this fight back, yes, a coalition of people from all creeds and cultures, but all of them must accept the particular nature of these values.
Melanie, you hear me? And I have to say that when you asked where this Melanie is, it was here. So you're here. I wanted to say that you said you were optimistic, and being someone who was born in the US and New York, which I think is still the largest city in the world with the most Jews, we've had, just this last week, on the right, people like Tucker Carlson saying that the Jews and the Mossad basically used Jeffrey Epstein to destroy the US from within. And this got rounding applause at a mainstream US conservative conference. While at the same time in New York, my hometown, there's a literal jihadist, communist, it's not superlative, he is, who also supports transgender rights. So it's like the full circle comes in one person, whose father is also a Columbia professor. So it's really the full circle of everything we've seen in the past year. So these two phenomenons, on the right, the old anti-Semitism creeping up, not so subtly anymore. And on the left, the largest city with the most Jews and the most important city in the world, economically speaking, is going to, at least as of now in the polls, going to elect a Muslim jihadist communist who hates Israel and refuses to condemn globalizing the Intifada. And you're optimistic. How are you optimistic?
Well, I'm not optimistic about New York, and I'm not optimistic about conservatism in America. I think that conservatism in America is currently experiencing a kind of nervous breakdown. It doesn't know what it is, and that's because conservatism, in my view, doesn't know what it is across the West, and that's been part of the problem. It doesn't know what it should be conserving. But we can come back to that in a minute. Why am I optimistic? I'm optimistic about Israel. I'm not optimistic about the West. I'm optimistic that I'm absolutely certain that Israel is going to not just survive and thrive, but it's going to become the regional power and a great world power. It's going to become an even greater force for good in the world than it is now. And I believe that we're living through, I feel very privileged to be here, to be living through such a seismic moment in Jewish history, which I think has the capacity for untold good things. Now, you know, I have to say my reputation over the last 30 years has not been as a little ray of sunshine. But I do, you know, it's part and parcel of living here and feeling this tremendous sense of unity, of purpose and commitment and certainty. When it comes to America, as I say, I think, you know, you've got this extraordinary alliance now in terms of hatred of Jews between a section of the MAGA community and the what I would call the Islamo-leftist alliance. The Islamo-leftist alliance is Mr. Mamdani, and the MAGA conservatives who've gone completely, wrong, are the Tucker Carlsons and so on. And I have puzzled over that for a long time, and it seems to me, I mean, I don't know, there may be venal motives here. You know, people, I mean, all I know is what I read, that Tucker Carlson is, you know, he's closely associated with Qatar, which is paying vast amounts of money for him to say what he's saying. Maybe that's true, maybe that's not true. I've no idea. So maybe it's, you know, it is as basic as venal, as venal motives. But the way I think of it is this, that, and tell me if I'm wrong, because I'm looking at America, you know, from a long distance, but there's been a long history of American isolationism going back decades. Indeed, Lindbergh, and indeed in the First World War. You know, now, why is there this history of isolationism? Well, in my view, it's because, and tell me if I'm wrong, it's how I think, that America is this vast country with untold riches and good things in it. It's sort of self-contained. It is, you know, and it's not surprising that its inhabitants have thought of it as kind of the perfect society. You don't need to go anywhere. For a long time, many Americans didn't even have a passport. Why would they need to go anywhere? Everything we need is here. Now, if bad people are trying to kill us, like, you know, 9/11, well, why on earth would that be? And why are we being roiled by all these terrible things that are happening? I mean, you know, we haven't done anything to hurt anybody. Why are we in the eye of the storm? Why are we being dumped on in this way? Well, so if things are so overwhelmingly frightening and incomprehensible, it leads a certain type of person into the idea that it must be a conspiracy. There must be hidden forces that we can't see. And that leads you absolutely straight into Jew hatred, the classic all-time conspiracy theory. So it's not surprising that you got this sort of isolationist tendency, which amazingly, not to me, and perhaps not to you, has turned into rabid Jew haters. That's how I see it.
Can I just ask one more thing? You said you feel so privileged to be here. What do you think of those who aren't here and are Jewish? What do you think of the Jews in the diaspora? That some of them, I guess, a lot of them have the means to be here, and they're not here. Most of them out of either, I guess, just being used to being not here, having their lives there, or just making money? I don't know. What do you think of Jews that aren't here and have the means to come here?
I understand exactly where they're coming from, and I have great sympathy for them. It's very, very hard to accept that your entire life has been living in a kind of fantasy, which has now kind of exploded around you. Until the year 2000, I had never been here and never wanted to come here, because Britain, I'm sorry about this, but Britain was the golden Medina. I know that probably America is the golden Medina, but Britain was the golden Medina. For various reasons, I didn't come here. And it is a tremendous shock to the system to get your mind round the idea that a place that you thought was entirely your home is not your home at all. Now, it's all very well for people to say, well, how stupid are you? Haven't you learned anything from history? This is precisely what the German Jews said. I've heard that all my life. The German Jews never understood. They weren't German. They weren't regarded as German. And, when the Nazis came to power, they still didn't realize it. How stupid were they? I can't believe it. And here are the British Jews doing much the same kind of thing, except that many of them are not. Many of them are not saying that. They're saying, we are frightened. We are really frightened, and we don't know what to do, because it's very, very difficult. I know everyone here, people here have done it, and so, this may seem crass and absurd sort of excuse making, but it is difficult. It is difficult to pack up and go. And, I'm afraid the level of pain, the calibration is that the level of pain has to be exponentially higher before many will come. Now, more are coming. I don't know what the numbers are, but certainly more are coming, and they're coming. More are coming from France. I think more are coming from America. I'm not sure, but you have to have a level of pain which makes people say, "Okay, now there is no doubt." And it's not for us to say how foolish and how wrong. I think one has to say this is human nature. Not possible.
Hi, Melanie. Thank you. My name is Ofir Dayan. I want to ask this question because I lived for 5 years in New York. I led a pro-Israel movement at Columbia University, which has gone psychic over the past few years. I wanted to ask you, what do you think is the future for Jewish Americans in this very, very progressive liberal spaces like Columbia? Do they have a role to play in educating their communities? If so, how? And what do you think their future are when it comes to their inability to defend Israel? Some of them lack basic knowledge, so they even sometimes are persuaded by tenured professors like Rashid Khalidi and others who propagate, and the father of your beloved Zohran Mamdani, who also is leading the charge against Israel at Columbia. So how do you see their role and their futures?
I'll take them one by one because I can't remember them. How do I see their future? It's pretty bleak, mainly because the Jews are dying out in America. 70% vote Democrat? 70% they're going to be lost. Their children, their grandchildren are going to be lost. You're going to be looking at a very much smaller, much more cohesive, much more religious Jewish community. So that's a source of some concern and sadness. And of those Jews who are no longer going to be Jews, they are going to be in the forefront of the people who are going to be attacking us, as they already are. What should be done? I don't think it's possible to exaggerate the appalling lack of leadership in the Jewish community in America and in Britain. They have said nothing of any value at all because many of them, if not most of them, are signed up to the rubbish that's coming our way. And so they've got to start educating Jews in Judaism and in Jewish ethics and in love of the of Judaism and the Jewish people and the state of Israel for the right reasons, not conditional on everybody basically accepting liberal universalist ideologies.
Next question.
Well, where is anybody supposed to go for a university education these days in the West? I mean, it's...
Take the next question.
Hi. This question might be quite bold, but first I'm comfortable because it's not the time to be timid. And also because you said that you said that you represent Jewish values, so it's okay. All of the guests here tonight know and value and love Judaism. We know that many of the pillars of the West that you mentioned earlier are quite exclusive to Judaism and not Christianity. Mainly responsibility for one's own actions, that's Jewish, that's not Christian, and civil discord and reason. So these two are Jewish and they're not Christian. Your thoughts, please.
Yeah, I think I said that. Thank you.
Next question. Anyone?
Thank you very much, Melanie. I think you're telling us that we need to go back to God's promise to Abraham with the covenant that the Jewish people is supposed to be a blessing to all the nations and not only to ourselves. But I think that the Jewish people hasn't, at least consciously, purposefully, taken that on as a goal for maybe a millennia. And I believe and I hope, like you, that this is a real promise, that it is possible, and I see the potential. But I'm wondering if you could give us some guidance, because I think that most Israelis don't think of Israel as a leader in the world.
Sure.
And I think that most Israelis don't know how Israel could become a leader in the world.
I entirely agree with you. Jews are very parochial. Diaspora Jews, diaspora Jews keep their heads down. The most they ever hope is to be left alone. No one be nasty to them, and to assimilate and into the society and take part in it and so on. It doesn't occur to them to have a role. In fact, they think that by having a role, they would put their heads above the parapet as Jews, and then they would get they would foment anti-Semitism. So they keep their heads down on the basis that that's going to make anti-Semitism less. Well, that went well, didn't it? You're right that Israel doesn't think of itself in that way at all. I don't think people in Israel, generally speaking, and I'm terribly sorry to be universalizing in this way, I think people in Israel haven't got the beginning of a clue about what's going on in terms of the cultural dysfunctionality of the West and why they hate Jews so much. They haven't got a clue. They just don't understand it, and they don't understand. You can see the argument that they've got enough on their plate. Israelis have got enough on their plate to look after themselves, let alone think about the rest of the West. And I hear that. I mean, that's a pretty good argument. On the other hand, how is Israel going to feel when it becomes this great powerhouse and all the things that I think it's capable of doing, and it's facing a Western bloc which is Islamic? Because that's what's coming. How's it going to feel? Is it going to feel safe? It's going to think, oh, well, it doesn't really matter. No. It's in Israel's interest, it's in everybody's interests for civilization to be kept on the road. So how are Israelis going to be brought to understand this? With great difficulty, obviously, but it's up to some of us who believe this to start talking in this way, because, as you say, Israelis haven't got a clue about all these things that I've just been talking about, and so they, in my view, it would be helpful to broaden the focus, not least so they can talk to Israeli Jews who have gone off the derech big time and want to be like any other country and like any other normal people. I mean, have they looked at the West? They think the West is normal? I mean, they need to be educated themselves. So I think this is the task, and it's a matter of leadership, and it's a matter of, if people agree that this is a task that should be done, then people have to start organizing to do that.
Thank you, Melanie, for your wise words. I'm Yaakov. My question is that I assume that in order for us to fulfill our role, we have to be very strong. We have to be strong in terms of military capabilities and powers. We have to have a strong economy, a strong science, strong education. Can we do that with so many countries turning against us? How can we be as strong as we need to be if we are not seeing any encouraging signs anywhere?
Yeah, you mean how can Israel be as strong as it needs to be?
Yes.
Without any encouraging signs? Well, Israel hasn't even started to make even the beginning of a half-hearted attempt to engage with that. It's absolutely astonishing. It just has taken the view over many decades. Well, first of all, we've got real things to think about, which of course it does, real wars to fight. Secondly, and I've heard this so often, you don't expect that with anti-Semitism, with Europe being the graveyard of our people, with what Britain did to us in the early 20th century, with the anti-Semitism in Britain and in the West, what you think that we're going to make any difference? And the answer is yes, but they are too arrogant to listen to that, unfortunately, and too preoccupied, understandably. But in my view, there are millions of people who are, I can only speak for Britain. I can't really speak for, France or the Netherlands or anywhere else. But in Britain, there are millions of people who are decent people. Okay, there's a fundamental anti-Semitism in the culture. Okay, but it was, for years it was under a stone. It was confined to the fringes. People are basically decent. They believe in fairness. It's absolutely in the DNA of the British. They believe in fairness and justice and law and orderliness. And they have been taught over many decades that Israel is on the wrong side of all those things. They've been taught it without any comeback at all. The Jewish community has never, ever stood up and told them the truth. And Israel has never bothered to tell them the truth. So they have no way of knowing. So it's absolutely, in my view, open. If Israel started telling people the truth, if Israel, for example, at a high level, were to say, the support for Palestinianism is a support for an agenda which is not only intent upon exterminating the state of Israel, but has based its whole so-called bogus Palestinian identity on stealing and appropriating the history of the Jewish people in their own homeland, that the Jewish people are the indigenous people of the land, and that the Jewish people are the only people with a legal right to be there, and that everything Israel does is in accordance with international law, and there is no illegal occupation. Now, to my knowledge, the state of Israel collectively has never put that into the public domain in Britain. Nobody in Britain has heard that. That's appalling. And I can tell you, if that were to be said at a high level, which would command people's attention, I don't care about law professors. If this was said at a high level, and if at a high level it was said, Britain's government is responsible more than any other government for the war that's continued for 100 years, because the wretched two-state solution was Britain's solution in the 1930s, and what it amounted to is what it amounts to today, which is to reward genocidal aggressors by giving them the lawful inheritance of the Jewish people. Now, if at a high level all those things were said, I can guarantee what would happen. There would be the mother and father of all rows, and people would say, what is this? This is rubbish, this is rubbish, this is terrible. But millions of people would say, what? Tell us more. Why are they saying this? And then you would have the beginning of a discussion and a debate which would open up the whole thing.
That has never been done. So of course it seems hopeless. The Jews are silent about this. We have got to start speaking up.
One more question?
Hi, I'm turning the look. I'm God from the Hebrew U. I was working on Pope Ratzinger, and he criticized the EU back in 2004 and then again in 2007 for the EU disparaging the role of God and Christianity. And he was making a big fight to have the EU announce that they are built on the bedrock of Christianity, and he failed. And I wanted to hear what your take on that point in European history, that no God, no Christianity, just economic structure of collaboration.
Well, I mean, he was absolutely on the right lines. He understood the spiritual vacuum in Europe and in the West. Obviously the Catholic Church, is not entirely unproblematic from our point of view. But nevertheless, the point he's making is basically right. And it's a point that the Islamists get, as I said earlier, that if you evacuate a society of its religious foundations, the society collapses and is then open for colonization by others. So what I'm saying in the book is that, well, I think that Christianity is certainly a problem, in terms of dumping on, despising, disparaging, and worse, the Jewish people over many decades, many centuries. And certainly in Britain, the church is in the forefront of the cultural collapse, unlike in America. So Christianity is not unproblematic, as I say, but I thought about this for a long time when I wrote the book, because I thought, is my conclusion that we actually are saying, that I'm actually saying Christianity is such a problem that actually it's at the root of the collapse of the core values. And I came to the conclusion that whatever damage it had done, it is the foundational creed of the West. And you can't disentangle it. And so we have to make it work. And so we Jews and Christians have got to basically work together. This is very, very, very difficult. I'm not talking about stupid interfaith committees, which, are like the peace process. They're kept on the road by never discussing anything important. I'm talking about actually making a kind of, a sort of pact that says, we got problems with each other. Let's park those. Let's park them. We have common enemies now, and we have to get together to fight those enemies. And I came up with one practical way which we could do this. For example, there is the most horrendous attempt to exterminate Christianity in the developing world going on. Huge persecution in Africa, particularly, and elsewhere, but in Africa, you've got Nigeria in particular, and other countries in Africa, Christians being burned alive in churches, Christian women being raped, the whole shebang. Unbelievably, not a word is said by anybody, but not a word is said by the churches. Now, how wonderful it would be if Jews and Christians were to get together and make an alliance to bring this to public attention, to start campaigning against it, to identify the countries and the people who are doing it, the people who are suffering, raise the entire subject. This would achieve many things. It would, first of all, create an alliance between Jews and Christians, which would be good. Secondly, it might actually do some good in terms of the actual atrocities going on. And thirdly, it would actually tell the West, here are Jews and Christians saying things which are I actually agree with this. This is conscience. This is morality. They're absolutely right. Why isn't anybody else saying it? So suddenly, the biblical religions that created the West are on the side of the angels, are on the side of right. And consequently, you get people then starting to stand up for that, starting to follow it. In other words, you have to, you have to take religion out of the church, out of the place of sacred worship. You have to put it into people's lives, and you put it in people's consciences and heads. You can do that in a variety of ways, but that's one way through it. So the idea that you can never get back to religious belief, I think is, it's true and it's not true. You don't have to get back to religious belief. I'm certainly not saying in this book people have got to become religious. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying that something quite different, that people of religion and no religion have to understand that without the religious basis of those values, they won't exist. And you have to consciously uphold them as based in the context in which they were originally given. It's a long and complicated argument, I'm afraid. That's a rather inadequate response.
I once sat with Rabbi Saxs when he came to Israel, and I was asking him, Rabbi, you're doing a lot of interfaith dialogue. Like, what do you think about it? And he told me, shh, it's a waste of time. I know it. Another questions from the crowd.
Can I ask one question? In Britain, where you're from, I just read that a lot of the churches are being turned into mosques in London and all these other places. And that's not only because there's a lot less Brits that are of Christian descent, it also is that people aren't having children and the Muslim community has a lot of children, but it's also because people aren't going to church anymore. And I wanted to ask you whether you think that a lot of this anti-Israel stuff, not on the Islamist movement, but on the Red-Green Alliance, comes from a sense of looking for belonging. So meaning people that used to maybe go to church and have a community and meet friends and marry, don't have that anymore. They're all sitting in front of their computers. They're all doing whatever people do in front of their computers. The only place that they find a sense of belonging, for example, is at an anti-Israel protest. The only, or at a BLM protest, or at a, a transgender coming out where, they bring the cake out, the gender reveal at the age of 30, whatever it is.
Yeah. Well, certainly, I think that's absolutely right. People need a sense of, people yearn to belong. There is a great absence of belonging for all the reasons that you suggest. There's also parallel to the sense of belonging having gone down the tubes. Purpose and meaning in people's lives has gone down the tubes as well, because we've given people everything. Everything has been for the individual. All problems have been erased in people's lives, and as a result, their lives are meaningless. So the challenge is to give a sense of belonging and a sense of purpose and meaning to people. I believe that religious communities are well placed to do that in principle. In practice, they haven't been well placed to do that in the Christian world, because it's all to do with, your relationship with the Almighty, which you commune with in a church on a Sunday morning. That's hopeless. What we can help teach is that it's all to do with how you live day by day. And what gives meaning to your life is all the little things that you do, which are invested with a greater significance, because they are not just about you, they're about challenges, they're about doing things for other people. And, all the sort of idealism that you have, which is directed, at things which you can probably do nothing about, you can actually direct it to things that you can do something about, provided there is that leadership. So it is a matter of religious leadership, and as well as political and cultural leadership.
Hi, Melanie. Thank you so much. Matan just mentioned Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, and my question is,
The Lord.
Lord.
Almighty. And I always had a feeling that some of his philosophical Jewish work is very apologetic, even the book Not in the Name of God. And Rabbi Uri Sherki is here, and you can say a lot of things about Rabbi Uri Sherki, but he's not apologetic. And I think this is inherently connected to the fact that Rabbi Jonathan Sacks lives in the Diaspora and Rabbi Sherki lives here. So my question, how do you see it? Because you said before that the Jewish community in Britain is silent. So how do you see the work of Jonathan Sacks in regard to this problem?
Well, it was a joke, but it was true when Jonathan Sacks was chief rabbi that loads and loads of Christians said if only he were the Archbishop of Canterbury, because he had a genius for bringing religion into people's lives in a way they could absolutely relate to, and they didn't even know it was religion. That was his genius. And his genius was also to understand the supreme dysfunctionality of the West, which he understood, I think, better than anybody. But he was a British Jew of a very particular kind, and he was apologetic, and he was criticized for being apologetic at the time. There were many issues to do with this because, you know, he was educated in secular schools and at a secular university, and he went to yeshiva very late in life. He got the whole religious thing very late in life, and consequently, he always felt at a tremendous. It seemed to me, he always felt at a tremendous disadvantage. And the Orthodox were always on his back. That he was basically that's what Epicurus. He was nothing. Whatever he said was of no validity because he wasn't really a rabbi, and he felt it. He couldn't cope with that, in my view. And so there was an apologeticness which was much deeper than the Jewish thing. In terms of Israel, again, he was criticized. He didn't come here very much, or wasn't seen to be coming here very much. He didn't speak up as much as people thought he should have done. And he took the view, he said, you know, it's not my role as a rabbi to speak up, to be political, and so on. And then, you know, after he stopped being chief rabbi, then his reputation really took off, because then people read what he'd been writing and what he was continuing to write, and people, you know, drew such inspiration and comfort from it, and still do. And so, you know, he's a complicated man. I think he was a great, great thinker. I learned a huge amount from him. You know, his influence over me can be seen in this book. And I often think, you know, so many of us think, if only he were here now. We think that every day, if only he were here now, because he would be guiding us, he would be talking to us, he would be giving wisdom to us and comfort to us. But the question in my mind is, how much would he be speaking up? And I really can't answer that question. He might have done. He might have seen the situation as so desperate that he absolutely had to speak up. And I think that's probably what he would have done, but I'm not sure.
I just wanted to say thank you so much for your words always, Melanie. And on top of that, thank you for being here in Israel. Thank you for your mind, for your insight, and the experience of you being in Israel, adding to your position and everything you're saying. And I don't know whether you wanted to share, but when we spoke last week, and I asked you, how did you feel about coming back from Britain and being here in Israel during the ballistic missiles from Iran? And I think your answer is very telling as a background to everything.
Okay. Yes, you asked me that, and I said that I mean, I'm mainly, Joshua and I are mainly here, but we live a completely insane life, and we go to London ridiculously often. But we're basically here. Our centre of gravity is here, and we were here during the 12-day war. And I mean, I'm a nervous individual, as I told you, and I was very frightened, even though Jerusalem was spared. But nevertheless, like all of us, we were up and down into the shelters in the middle of the night, and certainly in the beginning, we really didn't know whether those missiles were going to penetrate, because clearly they were a different order of magnitude from anything we'd had before. And I found it very, very alarming. I was constantly living on my nerves, still am. I went to London 2 weeks ago, and I was, looking at the phone the whole time for the alerts. And indeed, I got an alert in London. But anyway, that's another matter. So I was nervous. I was frightened. I was nervy, and I wasn't stoical. And I was fed up with it, and like so many of us. And you read the news, and it's like, what on earth is going on? Does anybody here understand what's going on? And does anybody in this entire country have a faintest idea what to do, and all that? And I was so pleased to be here. I felt so relieved coming back here from beastly Britain, which is calm, doesn't have missiles, everybody has everything, everybody goes around their business without any little hindrance. And it was such a pleasure to be back here, and I felt so kind of inspired and galvanized and safe, psychically safe, which is really quite bizarre given the circumstances. And I did feel it was a great, as I said earlier, a great privilege to be here. You just feel, sitting in the shelter, you're thinking, is that missile going to land on my building and kill me? Okay, because that's the way I think, being slightly apocalyptic. And in the very same thought process, I'm so pleased to be here. I mean, crazy or what? So I kind of been infected by the lunacy that is this country, really.
Welcome to Israel. Tamir, you want to ask? Last question.
Concerning being religious or coming back to being civilized, there are two different agendas. One of Rav Ori Shirky, who sit with us today, that says that the Goyim should be Bnei Noach. They shouldn't be like religious Christians. And the second is Yoram Chazonis or Dennis Prager's or maybe other conservative intellectuals who say to them, be good Christians. So which agenda do you think is the best?
Be good Christians. But please, be good Christians of the kind of Christian that love us. Because it's possible. I mean, do I have to say the obvious? Jesus was a Jew. It does come as a bit of a shock to some Christian audiences that I try that on. But there's no reason why you can't love the Jewish people and be a Christian. There are millions of Christians in America. I don't know, I'm pointing at you, but anyway, there are millions of Christians in America who love the Jews. And I know there are plenty of American Jews. I know they don't really, because they all want to convert us at the end of days, to which I say, well, I'll take my chances on that when I meet them at the end of days. And I mean, it's like ludicrous. So, but if they're not from Christians, then they're not going to be Christians. And if they're not going to be Christians, what are they going to be? They're going to be nothing. And if they're going to be nothing, then the society is nothing, I'm afraid. So, yes, I want them to be from Christians. I want them to be observant Christians. But there's, in my view, no reason why an observant Christian cannot love the Jewish people as the parent religion of their religion. There's no reason at all. It's a deformation, or it's a big deformation. But I mean, it's perfectly possible to be an observant Christian and not want Jews to be destroyed, to actually love them and to revere them as the source of your own religion. I think. I'm sorry about that if I've
We're all talking about Rabbi Risharki here. It's interesting. So I'm gonna talk about you as well. So I have a question about your book. You said in your speech that religious people are imbeciles. So I'm a big imbecile, and I have a kippah on my head. So I really have a question about, as a modern person who deeply believes in the idea of the Jewish people as a chosen people, as I heard many times from Rabbi Risharki. I have a question. I speak a lot with conservatives people, prominent figures from abroad, and I always tell them about how the Israel society is a conservative society and have big families and all the arguments of Rabbi Chaim Navon that maybe people here know. But I always think to myself, someone might say, maybe one of my friends that goes to Kaplan and he isn't an imbecile, he doesn't have a kippah to his head. He might say, the culture wars here are just like those in the West. You have here conservatives, you have here liberal, progressive people. So maybe we are presenting Israel maybe as an ideal, almost as a conservative paradise. How do you, what do you say to this argument?
Well, your notional Kaplanista friend says it's the same as in the West. But it's not the same as in the West, because in the West, the kind of people he's talking about control the entire culture, and the West is going down as a result. Here, although they are very influential, they don't control the entire culture. The culture is controlled by the people who understand, believe in, love, revere, and want to continue with the Jewish project, the particularist Jewish project. And that's why this country is going to survive and thrive. That's the difference. It sounds like your hypothetical Kaplanista friend has a yearning to be like the West. Good luck with that one. Because the West is destroying itself from within, and the kind of things that he thinks are good and desirable, the kind of values he thinks are good and desirable, are self-destructive and would soar off the branch on which he or she sits.
If someone thought about relocation here, so think again, okay?
As I say, you don't have to be religious. I mean, the thing that has struck me, and I've got this in the book, there are so many examples of secular Tel Avivis doing stuff which is, they're not religious, they're not observant. And they, as far as they're concerned, like you said, and I hope people viewing this will realize that you were being ironic when you said that you were an imbecile because you were religious. Because
I was ironic.
Fine. But they would certainly take that view that, to be sophisticated, you have to be secular, okay. But nevertheless, look at what they're doing. They are celebrating all kinds of Jewish religious festivals and events and punctuation points in the week. Kabbalat Shabbat. They on Shavuot. They're up, during the evening into the night, having discussions. Okay, it's not the same agenda as somebody who is either kippah sruga or points more religious. But the fact is they're identifying with the tradition that is a religious tradition. And I've got also in my book something which Daniel Gordis wrote very, very strikingly. I think it was 2022. It was Yom Kippur in Dizengoff Square. And he said there were thousands and thousands of young people. And there were some kippot, certainly, but probably the majority were completely, the men were bareheaded. They were just Tel Avivis. And they all sang, they chanted parts of the Ne'ilah service. They chanted it. Like, okay, so they're not religious. They're not, but it's quite different from Britain, which is really godless, which has embraced values which are inimical to biblical values because they're based on the self, and they're based on gratification, and they're based on materialism, and they don't have any kind of higher thing. And you look at all these, not all, but so many secular people in Israel. They're connecting to a sense of peoplehood which they themselves, despite themselves, acknowledge to be rooted in a religious tradition. And that's what keeps the show on the road. It's the religious tradition that keeps the show on the road. So it's a very, very different society. And if your Kaplanista friend doesn't understand that I'm afraid is his tragedy.
With this note of tragedy, Melanie Phillips, thank you very much. It was our privilege.
Thank you.
Exacto,